Once sport organized identity and loyalty, it learned how to monetize attention, and everything changed. Once sport became stable, symbolic, and emotionally embedded, it attracted something new: sustained attention at scale. Crowds had always mattered, but attention now extended beyond physical presence. Sport entered a phase where visibility itself became value. This shift did not begin with technology alone. It began with predictability. Schedules, standardized competition, and reliable outcomes made sport something that could be planned around. Once events occurred at known times and followed recognizable structure, they became suitable for transmission, promotion, and packaging. Media did not create sport's power. It recognized it. Sport offered narrative, repetition, rivalry, and resolution, elements that translated easily beyond the field. Authority adapted quickly, shaping competition to fit formats that maximized reach. Games were timed, breaks were standardized. Visibility became a design constraint. As audiences expanded, attention became currency. The value of sport was no longer measured only in participation or loyalty, but in how many people could be gathered at once. Authority learned to treat attention as a resource to be managed, protected, and sold. This transformation altered priorities. Decisions about scheduling, format, and presentation increasingly favored visibility over experience. What worked best for broadcast or coverage shaped what happened on the field. Sport adjusted its rhythms to external demand. Commercial interest followed naturally. Sponsorship aligned with attention. Branding integrated into environments. Identity, once communal, became marketable. Authority balanced tradition with monetization, preserving symbols while attaching price. Participants felt this shift directly. Performance now existed under constant observation. Athletes became content as well as competitors. Behavior, expression, and even failure carried market consequence. Visibility amplified reward and risk simultaneously. Fans adapted as well. Watching replaced attending for many. Connection persisted without presence. Sport became portable, entering homes, routines, and conversations far from the field. Authority gained reach while losing intimacy. This new relationship reshaped power. Those who controlled access to visibility gained influence. Media partners, sponsors, and distributors joined governance structures. Authority expanded beyond sport itself into networks of commerce and communication. Yet the system remained familiar. Rules still governed play. Loyalty still anchored identity. Values still framed legitimacy. What changed was scale. Sport could now exist everywhere at once, continuously present rather than episodic. This expansion intensified competition between sports, teams, and events. Attention fragmented. Authority responded by refining spectacle, emphasizing drama, and compressing experience. What mattered most was holding focus. Sport entered the business of attention, not by abandoning its roots, but by leveraging them. Play, identity, and loyalty became inputs. Visibility became output. Control adjusted accordingly. The next step was inevitable. Once attention could be measured, traded, and optimized, sport began reorganizing itself around consumption rather than participation. The game did not stop being played, it began being produced. As attention became measurable, it also became controllable. Sport no longer relied solely on organic interest or local loyalty. It learned how to structure itself around consumption, shaping experience to maximize engagement rather than participation. The game began adjusting not just to audiences, but to metrics. Time became the first variable to be optimized. Length, pacing, and rhythm of competition were refined to fit viewing habits. Breaks were standardized. Moments were segmented. What once unfolded naturally was now arranged deliberately. Authority framed these changes as accessibility, but they reflected a deeper shift toward efficiency of attention. Scheduling followed the same logic. Games moved to optimal viewing windows rather than traditional times. Consistency mattered more than convenience for participants. Sport adapted to routines shaped by work, media cycles, and global coordination. Authority prioritized reach over locality. Format became flexible. Rules were adjusted to increase scoring, reduce downtime, and maintain momentum. Over time, structures, replay systems, and presentation elements were introduced not only to ensure fairness, but to preserve interest. The system favored clarity and drama over ambiguity. Narrative control intensified. Storylines were emphasized before competition began. Rivalries were highlighted. Individual figures were elevated. Context was curated, so audiences knew what mattered and why. Authority learned that attention thrives on meaning as much as action. This narrative framing influenced perception. Viewers were guided towards certain interpretations. Success and failure were explained through approved lenses. Sport did not tell false stories, but it selected which stories to tell. Authority shaped understanding by shaping emphasis. Commercial integration deepened alongside narrative control. Sponsorship became embedded rather than adjacent. Branding entered visual space, language, and ritual. The environment itself became part of the product. Identity was no longer only symbolic. It was transactional. Athletes experienced this transformation as constant exposure. Performance unfolded under persistent observation. Every action carried visibility beyond the moment. Expression, error, and even absence became content. Authority benefited from this visibility while shifting risk downward. Fans adjusted their relationship to sport. Consumption became continuous. Highlights replaced attendance. Discussion extended beyond events into cycles of anticipation and reaction. Sport filled time rather than punctuating it. Authority gained presence but diluted immediacy. This environment rewarded predictability. Systems favored participants and formats that delivered reliable engagement. Novelty was allowed only when it could be controlled. Authority learned to innovate without destabilizing consumption patterns. Control over distribution became critical. Platforms determined access. Visibility depended on alignment with distribution networks. Authority extended into partnership agreements that shaped who could watch, when, and how. Access became conditional rather than open. These structures introduced new hierarchies. Sports with greater media compatibility gained prominence. Others struggled for attention. Authority redistributed legitimacy based on viewership rather than tradition. Survival depended on adaptability to consumption logic. Data reinforced this hierarchy. Ratings, engagement metrics, and analytics guided decision-making. Authority responded to numbers rather than experience. What could be measured mattered. What could not faded. This feedback loop accelerated change. Formats adjusted to metrics. Metrics responded to formats. Authority operated within this cycle, optimizing for visibility. The game remained, but its shape shifted continually. Yet beneath optimization, the original appeal persisted. Uncertainty, effort, and emotion still drove engagement. Authority did not replace these elements. It harnessed them. The system learned how to package authenticity without relinquishing control. As sport reorganized around attention, a new tension emerged. The more the game was produced, the more it risked losing the spontaneity that created meaning. Authority balanced carefully, preserving enough unpredictability to sustain interest while controlling outcomes structurally. This balance defined the era. Sport existed simultaneously as competition and content. Authority governed both. The field remained central, but the frame around it grew more important. The next transformation followed naturally. Once sport became product, it invited forces beyond media and sponsorship. Capital, investment, and ownership entered at scale, reshaping priorities entirely. Attention had value. Now it would be leveraged. Once attention could be measured and monetized, capital followed. Sport entered a phase where ownership and investment no longer sat quietly in the background. They became central forces shaping priorities, decisions, and futures. The game had always required resources, but now it attracted capital at scale. Ownership structures changed accordingly. Teams and leagues were no longer sustained primarily by local patronage or civic pride. They became assets, entities valued for revenue potential, brand strength, and growth opportunity. Authority reframed stewardship as investment, positioning financial control as necessary for stability and expansion. This shift altered decision-making logic. Choices were evaluated through return rather than tradition. Facilities were built not only to host competition, but to maximize revenue streams. Scheduling considered broadcast value. Rule changes weighed entertainment impact. Authority justified these adjustments as modernization, aligning sport with economic reality. Capital demanded predictability. Revenue forecasts relied on stable formats and controlled risk. Authority responded by reinforcing governance, standardizing operations, and limiting volatility. Competition remained uncertain, but the business around it became tightly managed. Ownership also redefined relationships with labor. Athletes were no longer just participants within an institution. They were investments. Contracts reflected potential value over time. Development systems prioritized yield. Authority balanced performance against preservation of assets, managing bodies with economic calculation. This financial framing extended into identity. Teams represented markets rather than communities. Relocation became viable when growth demanded it. Loyalty was tested against profitability. Authority positioned these moves as strategic necessity, even as they fractured local attachment. Media partnerships deepened this alignment. Broadcast agreements provided guaranteed revenue, reinforcing dependence on visibility. Capital flowed through distribution networks. Authority adapted competition to suit partners, integrating commercial needs into governance structures. Private investment introduced new timelines. Owners expected growth within defined horizons. Patience diminished. Authority favored decisions that produced measurable results quickly. Long-term cultural considerations often yielded to short-term financial logic. This acceleration reshaped competition indirectly. Parity mechanisms were introduced to preserve interest. Revenue sharing stabilized markets. Authority intervened to protect the product rather than the game itself. Competition was curated to sustain consumption. Globalization followed naturally. Capital sought new markets. Sport expanded beyond original boundaries, packaging identity for international audiences. Authority standardized presentation to ensure consistency across contexts. Local nuance gave way to global brand coherence. These expansions altered meaning. Sport remained emotionally resonant. but attachment became abstracted. Fans supported symbols rather than proximity. Authority leveraged this distance, cultivating loyalty untethered from place. Investment also changed accountability. Owners answered to financial outcomes rather than communities. Authority mediated this gap through governance, but power concentrated upward. Decision-makers grew more distant from lived experience. Resistance emerged occasionally, but structure absorbed it. Financial success justified continuity. Authority framed prosperity as proof of legitimacy. Growth became moral validation. This environment rewarded alignment with capital. Those who adapted advanced. Those who resisted marginalized themselves. Authority did not suppress opposition overtly. It outpaced it. Over time, sport became inseparable from investment logic. Competition remained the visible center, but financial structures dictated rhythm and direction. Authority governed through markets as much as rules. Yet this transformation was not total. The unpredictability of play continued to generate value. Capital depended on uncertainty even as it sought control. Authority balanced this contradiction carefully, preserving enough chaos to sustain interest. The game endured, but its purpose shifted. It existed not only to be played or watched, but to generate return. Sport became both cultural institution and financial instrument. As capital embedded itself deeper, new pressures emerged. Inequality widened. Access shifted. Power concentrated further. The next slide examines how this financialization reshaped participation itself and who the modern game was truly built for. As capital reshaped ownership and priorities, its effects reached participation itself. Sport did not simply grow more profitable, it grew more selective. Access to the game increasingly reflected economic reality. What had once depended on proximity and interest now depended on resources, infrastructure, and visibility. The cost of participation rose steadily. Facilities became specialized. Training demanded expertise. Travel expanded as competition centralized. Authority framed these developments as professional standards, but they quietly narrowed entry. Those who could afford investment advanced. Those who could not adapted or withdrew. Youth systems revealed this shift most clearly. Development pathways promised opportunity but required early commitment and sustained expense. Families became stakeholders, absorbing cost and risk long before outcomes were known. Authority positioned these systems as meritocratic, yet access determined exposure. Geography reinforced inequality. Regions with established infrastructure attracted tournaments, scouts, and media attention. Peripheral areas faded from view. Authority responded with expansion language, but resources remained concentrated. Inclusion existed rhetorically more than materially. Standardization deepened this divide. Uniform rules and formats ignored local context. Models designed for scale replaced organic variation. Authority favored systems that could be replicated and monetized. Diversity of experience diminished as participation conformed to centralized expectations. Visibility became currency. Advancement depended on being seen by the right institutions. Performance outside sanctioned environments struggled to matter. Authority controlled pathways of recognition, shaping who progressed and who remained invisible. This logic altered motivation. Participation shifted from enjoyment toward optimization. Play became preparation. Exploration narrowed. Authority rewarded early specialization, reinforcing systems that produced predictable outcomes. Creativity survived, but it carried risk. Communities felt this loss. Local traditions weakened as national structures dominated. Authority absorbed grassroots energy without redistributing power. Sport remained present, but ownership of meaning shifted upward. Inequality also appeared in leadership. Decision-makers rarely mirrored participants. Authority spoke for sport without sharing control. Representation lagged behind rhetoric. Systems preserved existing hierarchies even as they expanded. Attempts to address disparity often reinforced control. Programs were administered from above. Solutions maintained structure. Authority managed inequality rather than dismantling it. Progress occurred within limits that preserved stability. Participants internalized these constraints. Aspirations adjusted to perceived barriers. Many exited early, not from lack of passion, but from lack of access. Authority did not need to discourage participation. The system filtered automatically. Narratives of exception obscured structure. Stories of extraordinary ascent reinforced belief in openness. Authority relied on rarity to justify rule. Success appeared possible, even as pathways narrowed. Over time, these patterns stabilized. Participation reflected investment. Authority achieved sustainability by limiting entry. The game continued, but it belonged increasingly to those who could afford alignment. Yet sport still claimed universality. The language of opportunity persisted. This contradiction endured because it served the system. Authority maintained legitimacy through aspiration rather than access. As financial logic deepened, the consequences extended beyond fairness. They reshaped the future of play itself. When access narrows, innovation slows. When pathways close, talent is lost unseen. The game endured, but unevenly. Sport remained powerful, but its reach became selective. Authority preserved the institution at the cost of inclusion. The final slide examines where this leaves sport today, caught between expansion and exclusion, passion and product, play and profit, and what pressures may force its next transformation. By this stage, sport no longer existed only as competition or culture. It functioned as a product, designed, distributed, and sustained through systems built to capture attention and generate return. Play still mattered, but it mattered within frameworks shaped by media, capital, and control. This did not strip sport of meaning. It reorganized it. Passion persisted because uncertainty remained. Loyalty endured because identity had already been formed. The spectacle thrived because the structures around it were stable enough to support constant exposure. Authority did not replace emotion. It learned how to scale it. Yet the trade-offs became unavoidable. As access narrowed and priorities shifted, sport gained reach, but lost elasticity. The more it optimized for consumption, the harder it became to adapt without disruption. Innovation slowed. Inequality widened. The system protected itself by preserving what worked. Sport now lived with a permanent tension between play as experience and sport as product, between community and market, between unpredictability and control. That tension did not signal failure. It defined the modern game. What comes next is shaped by pressure. New technologies, new audiences, and new expectations continue to challenge how sport is produced and who it serves. The question is not whether sport will change again, but what it will protect when it does. As long as attention has value, sport will be shaped by those who control it. And as long as people care deeply about games, that control will always be contested.
Sport now lived with a permanent tension between play as experience and sport as product. between community and market, between unpredictability and control. That tension did not signal failure, it defined the modern game. What comes next is shaped by pressure. New technologies, new audiences, and new expectations continue to challenge how sport is produced and who it serves. The question is not whether sport will change again, but what it will protect when it does. As long as attention has value, sport will be shaped by those who control it. And as long as people care deeply about games, that control will always be contested.